Welcome to another tier maker. This one is about one of my favorite directors. Kinda not. We'll get into that in a minute. David Fincher is one of the... Oh, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. He's an auteur in the cloth of a Stanley Kubrick, and some of his visual cues come from Stanley Kubrick, but he is interested in telling much different stories. Is focused much more on humanity and the loss of humanity. We'll get into that as well. He's dabbled in a couple of other areas though, and I think it's going to be fun to pick them apart a little bit. So David Fincher got his start in music videos. As many of you probably know, he did a bunch of Madonna videos in the late 80s and some other videos as well. And then he had the chance to direct Alien 3 for 20th Century Fox. So we'll start with that one. And by the way, this list that I found on Tiermaker was not chronological order. I went and put them in chronological order because I want to talk about them that way. Because I think looking at his career in chronological order is going to be a good way to explain how he's gotten to different points. So we'll start with Alien 3. I saw this in a theater. I was incredibly disappointed. The last 30 minutes of this movie is a bit of an incoherent mess. And for years, that was all we had, was Alien 3. And then later on, a director's cut came out, much later. And you see what Fox fought against. They just wanted to keep him in an under 2-hour type runtime. The director's cut, don't quote me, I want to say it's like 215 or 220. Alien 3 run times. The theatrical cut is 115 minutes. The assembly cut is 145. So it's just under 2.5 hours. So they cut 30 minutes out of it. If you watch the assembly cut, which is their way of, it's a director's cut. It's much closer to what Fincher's intended vision was. You get more story, you get more character, you get a little more of an understanding of what they're doing in the last 30 minutes or so. And it flows a lot better. It's weird. Making a movie longer doesn't usually make it better. Usually you want to trim. But this is back in the early 90s. This was a time when all the major studios were thinking movies need to be under 2 hours so we can maximize the time in a day that theaters are open so we can get more showings, right? If you put out a 3-hour movie, that's one less showing you're going to get. Maybe 1.5, depending on how theaters are open and how they run. Under 2 hours, you're pretty much maximizing that. They said, no, you need to deliver a cut that's under 2 hours. And it burned him out on the entire Hollywood process. It pissed him off. It soured him, not burned out. It soured him on it. And every other movie you're going to see on this list, he has final cut, where he can basically say, as long as he delivers R rating, and final cut's different for every picture, every studio, etc. They're going to say you can get final cut as long as these tenets are hit. You can't say final cut and deliver an NC-17 or an X-rated movie. Like there are boundaries because the studio funded the production. They've got to get some of that money back. It's a business at the end of the day. But in this case, Alien 3, and I'll move on here in a second. It's just such an important film when you look at David Fincher's history and how he still works within the Hollywood process. He didn't pick up his stuff and just move to England like Stanley Kubrick did. A kid from New York, from Brooklyn, I think, Brooklyn or Queens, who just said, yeah, I've had it with the studio process after Spartacus, and he just packed up and left. He didn't follow that route. Fincher stayed in, and he's working inside the process, but he's getting final cut on everything to make sure that he can make the films the way he wants. I wonder what the Wheeler cut of Apocalypse Now would be like. So I would take Redux, the scene of where we get more of Kilgore, more surfing, more of the conversations with him and the surfer that's on the PBR Street Gang. Those scenes are great. The French Plantation, way too long. And the thing is, you can't really trim that down in a way that makes it viewable to even have it as belong in the movie. It doesn't need to be there. It kills the pacing of the film completely. So I would 86 the French Plantation. I would keep in the stuff, more of the stuff with Kilgore. Give me more of Robert Duvall, please. Okay, you got me off topic, but it's a good question. Because I've seen the theatrical Apocalypse now probably 20 times. I've seen Redux 2 or 3 times. I've seen the final cut just once. So I'm not an expert on either of those redone versions. Back to Alien 3, though, I have to say, as a first film, it was disappointing in theaters. The assembly cut is better. It's good enough for me. If you're talking about the assembly cut, it's a low B. It's watchable. If you're talking about the theatrical, it's high D, low C. So if we're going to talk about theatrical, I'm going to put it as a low C. But just know that the assembly cut is better, and I would put it as a B. So it's kind of weird. Like, if both of these were listed in here, that's how I would put them. Now you have 7. 2 years later, I saw this in a theater 3 times. It was a serial killer movie unlike anything that had ever been made before. Andrew Kevin Walker wrote the script and immediately became one of the hottest names in Hollywood because of the twists and turns of this. That this script would come from someone's mind. And it's messed up, and it's dark, and it's watchable. It's oppressive. But you're there the whole time because of Mills and Somerset, the 2 leads. Morgan Freeman perfectly cast as, this is my last case, right? We've seen that a million times, right? They take that trope, but wow, did they spin it around. And I'm sorry, Brad Pitt has been really good in a bunch of movies. I like Brad Pitt. He's not the best actor Oscar winner type. And when 1995, he was still kind of the pretty boy. I mean, he did Legends of the Fall before this. He was True Romance, which was just kind of a fun throwaway role that I would have liked more of, as the stoner that's sitting on the couch. And then before that was Thelma and Louise, I believe, or was Thelma and Louise after. And he was the pretty boy. Interview with the Vampire. So all the movies he was in, he was the pretty face and didn't have a lot to do in those movies. Then comes 7. And I went to 7 with no expectations of Brad Pitt's performance. He nailed it. As a character who is just, you could tell he was probably an ex-jock, maybe a failed jock. And just the rage in him. Whatever character background he had for his character, it's fantastic. His performance is fantastic. You can see the frustration on him at so many different levels. He's not a book guy, and here's Morgan Freeman feeding him all this stuff. I'm sorry, I could talk about 7, and I'm sure so much has been written about the inspiration, the Dante's Inferno, the 7 Deadly Sins, the visual style of it. I don't want to say it's the most Stanley Kubrick looking of all of Fincher's films, and there are some mistakes in some of the editing. There's one scene when they're in the car and the camera's in the back seat and it's looking forward, and Morgan Freeman's side, it's like sprinkling, and then it's one conversation, and then it cuts to Brad Pitt and it's pouring buckets, and then it cuts back to Morgan Freeman and it's like sprinkling. I'm like, y'all are in the same car. I didn't catch that until like the 7th or 8th viewing, okay? So it's not that big of a nitpick. I also would say they tried really hard with the very last lines in the narration, which 99% of the time, narration in a movie does not make it better. In this, the narration does not make it better, especially at the very end. It doesn't need narration. Show the chopper flying away from the scene, him in the car, Mills in the car being driven away. Roll credits. Don't give me narration. But I think that was the studio trying to take a tiny bit of the edge off. But after 2 hours of just bleakness, it didn't make a difference. And I just went, it didn't need that. These are tiny, minor, super nitpicky complaints, and this is an S tier. This is a film that has been up there for me as one of, I don't want to say influential films because I think I'm a serial killer, but it is such an incredibly well-crafted film. And for Fincher's second, it's kind of a masterpiece. Then he came back with The Game. Now this is one of his movies I think most people haven't seen. It's weird because it was a big deal on home video when it came out, from the maker of Seven, right? I mean, plastered all over it. I believe this was a Universal film. I don't know that this was Fox, because Seven was Warner Brothers. It was New Line Cinema at the time. Metal agrees. Black Metal agrees. Seven is indeed a masterpiece. It's hard to argue it, right? I mean, when I'm nitpicking enough to find little editing flaws, but there's not a scene I would cut. Not even when Somerset and Paltrow's character go and eat. That's a scene that it's setting something up kind of, but at the time, the first time you see the film, you're like, why are we here? It makes sense. All right, The Game. I'll tell you what, this is a movie that I loved the shit out of, but I've only seen it twice. Here's the thing. I'm not going to spoil this because I know some of you viewers have probably not seen this movie because, like I said, it's one of his least known films. See The Game, all right? You need to see The Game. It is unbelievable in the way it was made. It's unbelievable in the performances. Michael Douglas is really put upon in this movie in a way. If you're not a Michael Douglas fan, you need to watch this movie. If you're a Michael Douglas fan, you need to watch this movie. I don't know what else to tell you. I will not spoil it, but I will tell you this. I started working in the movie industry around this time. All right, I was working at a video store. That counts. And I took this home, this VHS home, the day that it came out, and it blew my mind. Here's the problem with it though. I watched it a second time, knowing what happens, and it's still a decent movie. It's a B. But nothing beats that first viewing. And honestly, the first viewing is S- to A+. It's the second viewing where you're like, eh. So it's not a bad movie. It's a very good movie. It's just that feeling of that first time. Remember when people say, I wish I could go back and watch that for the first time again? The Game is one of those movies where I wish if I could wipe that little bit of my memory and watch it again, I would love to see it again. But it's a B. Chat, are you with me? How are you feeling so far? All right. I know Black Metal said he's down with 7. Okay. Fight Club, 1999. Now, at this point, he's averaging a movie every 2 years. Alien was 93 or 92? The Game was 90. 7 was 95. The Game is 97. Fight Club's 99. Fight Club. 20th Century Fox had no idea what to do with this movie, by the way. I was working still at a video store at the time, but I was not in the corporate office for this video store yet. I went and saw this in a theater twice. Yes, Black Metal. Let's go ahead and acknowledge that. Right now I'm speaking about Fight Club, which means I've broken the first 2 rules of Fight Club. I don't think there's anybody who's even has a remote interest in film who hasn't seen this yet. So we're going to go ahead and talk spoilers. Warning. If you haven't seen it, you might want to skip ahead a little bit until you see where I place it, and then you can let go of the YouTube thing. It's based on a pretty popular book by Chuck Palahniuk, and it is twists and turns galore. The book was meant to be a satire, and a lot of Chuck Palahniuk stuff is satire. If it's not straight horror, it's satire. He made a book about toxic masculinity before that phrase even existed. The problem is, and I don't know that David Fincher really got the point of the book. I feel like they're making it look, and this is the problem I think a lot of people have with Fight Club, so I'm not saying anything that's that original. They're making it look fun. The pranks, not all the fights, some of the fights don't look fun, but being a part of everything, being a part of that looked fun. They're living in squalor in a dilapidated house. He made it look fun. And the Dust Brothers soundtrack is phenomenal. I bought that soundtrack. I have that CD here somewhere. It fits the mood of the film perfectly. It is edited perfectly. And this film, Fox had no idea how to market it. It did about $40 million at the box office total. 2 of those visits were me. But I felt like we were seeing a new masterpiece when I watched it. I will say it has not held up as well because of I'm not sure, and I need to go and look and see if there's an interview with Fincher recently asking about Fight Club. Did you realize the book was a satire? And to be fair, it's easier in a book to make it look like you're winking at people. Look at American Psycho. American Psycho, as a book, is dark as fuck. But then there's moments where you're realizing the narrator's breaking with reality. And then you think about it, and spoiler for American Psycho, the only people he really kills are prostitutes and homeless people. Which, honestly, did he actually kill Paul Allen? It's up in the air. But the movie took the humor and played that up, which was a genius move. And it becomes satire because they played up the humor. I have to return some videotapes. It's a funny line in the book. It's even funnier in the movie. So what does that have to do with Fight Club? Fight Club, there's very few hints of satire. It's comedy, but not satire. And I think that's the problem why that movie has not aged as well for me. Because now we live in an age where toxic masculinity is just, it's all over the place. And now it's like people are proud of being toxic. And not that people are starting fight clubs or anything, but this movie then was a raw primal scream of a movie, and now it just doesn't view the same way, and for that it's an A. It's crafted immaculately, and I don't think it won any Oscars. I would have liked it to have won Best Editing because it was edited so well. Was this movie on a different tier maker you've done before? No. Because I haven't done Brad Pitt movies. If I would have done Brad Pitt movies, it would have been on there. Or Edward Norton movies. I have not done a tier maker for either of those actors. So, no, it is not. And by the way, this movie got me reading some Chuck Palahniuk books. I've read like 4 or 5 of his. I have not read his horror stuff. I've read most of his satires. Well, they're all satires. They're drama, satire, weird. Choke is a fantastic read, by the way. The movie, it's okay, but the energy in the book is phenomenal, and you just really can't replicate. After I read the book and then I heard they were making a movie, I'm like, I don't know if they're going to be able to pull off that energy, and they did. And nothing against Sam Rockwell, but there's something about the book Choke that's fantastic. Invisible Monsters is another one, which they never tried to make. Survivor is another one that, for a split second, someone rumored they were going to try to make that movie. You cannot make that into a movie. I don't care what anyone says, especially now. It just can't happen. Okay. Now, a few years passed after Fight Club before he did Panic Room. This is 2001 or 2002? Because that would be 2 years. David Fincher movies. Let me go back here. David Fincher films. All right. Alien 3 was 92. 7 was 95. Game 97. Fight Club 99. Panic Room 2002. Okay. I am building to a point with all of that, by the way, talking about the years in between. So, Panic Room 2002, about 3 years later. This was a movie where all eyes were on David Fincher now, because Fight Club was not a hit at the box office because, again, Fox had no fucking clue what they were doing with that movie to market it. And all the soap stuff. Like, yeah, they were making soap out of fat from people that they were stealing, and then it's a throwaway joke in the book and in the movie. They chose to make that the marketing. I think people were confused about it. What does soap have to do with Fight Club? Very little. But when it came out in video, holy shit, did word of mouth take off. And people rented this thing hook, line, and sinker for years. So when Panic Room was about to come out, all the talk was from the director of Fight Club and Seven. And I'll be honest, he took in a small scale story in a brownstone in New York City, and has Jodie Foster and Kristen Stewart, one of her first roles, as the child who's diabetic. And they move into a brownstone, and the brownstone, they get home invaded by, three. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to spoil anything else. It is a very interesting movie, and it holds your attention through all of it, even though it gets a little repetitive in the last third or so. And it's the way he moves the camera around. By the way, the opening titles of that has gigantic words that look like they're a part of buildings. It was a CGI thing. No one had ever done that I'd ever seen. Now you see it in movie credits all the time. Go to YouTube and look up, or open a separate browser and open up and view the opening credits for Panic Room, and you'll see what I mean. You'll be like, oh, okay. That was one of the first people to ever do it. In fact, it might have been the first to ever do it. I've never done Edward Norton movies. I have not done a tearmaker on either of those actors. Edward Norton's done some really good stuff, and then he's done a lot of indie stuff, and I've only seen a little bit of the indie stuff. Captain Corelli's Mandolin, I think he's in that. Or am I thinking of a different one? I don't even know if I'm thinking. Anyway, Edward Norton's been in a bunch of stuff that I haven't seen, which is why I haven't done one for him. Panic Room it's well cast. It's incredibly well filmed, and it's a cocktail napkin story that doesn't really hold together by the end. It's tense, but it's almost like Fincher said, I put too much of myself into Fight Club. It took too much out of me to do all of this and tell this crazy ass story, and some of the shit that he took for it, and the way the studio like laid into him. He had Final Cut, but which is why the movie's like 2 hours and 20 minutes. Could you have cut some time out of Fight Club? Yes, you could have. I think you could have, and that film would have been a tiny bit tighter. Panic Room. Oh, God. Here's the problem. Panic Room gets better with repeated viewings, unlike the game, which is why I'm putting it as a high B. The game doesn't get better on repeated viewings, but Panic Room does. But I saw that in the theater. I've seen a lot of his stuff in theaters, to be fair. And I walked out going, kind of, I liked it just a tiny bit. But on repeated viewings, it has gotten better. And by the way, there is a DVD box set out there, and maybe the Blu-ray has it. I don't think there's a 4K yet. Panic Room. The making of. Holy shit. If you want to learn how to be a filmmaker, watch that. It is a master class, and I don't throw that word around very often. The making of documentary on the Panic Room Special Edition is better than the movie. It is soup to nuts from the first production meetings, conversations with the screenwriter before they even had their first production meeting. He was recording everything, and it all got edited into a documentary. It is phenomenal. In fact, I have not watched that in a long time. I need to go and watch it. It is one of the best behind-the-scenes making of documentaries ever. And it was a movie that didn't do a lot of box office and didn't really rent all that well, so not a lot of people saw it. I'm telling you right now, incredible documentary. Oh, Riz, really? Riz redeemed a tearmaker for Edward Norton movies. We'll see what's out there. We'll see what's out there. I don't know if I'm doing 2 tearmakers in one night, though. I don't think that's happening. All right, moving on to Zodiac. Another serial killer movie, but let me tell you, this one's a lot different from 7. And if you know anything about the Zodiac killer, you'll know, spoiler alert, they never found the Zodiac killer. I know. Every once in a while, you'll see an article come out where somebody says, I found something in this guy's basement that makes him be this. There's a couple of suspects, but honestly, It's about as on the nose as Jack the Ripper. There are theories. There's no proof. There's no real proof. There's things that tie. There's circumstantial evidence in a couple of in the case of one person specifically, and that person's no longer alive. So the Zodiac Killer is gone. But that movie, I watched it not in a theater. I actually watched it on home video. It is almost 3 hours long. In fact, I want to say it is Fincher's longest movie. No, Benjamin Button is longer by like 10 minutes maybe. Let's look that up real quick. Zodiac was how long? 157 minutes. Benjamin Button 166 minutes. So just under 10 minutes. I was close. Zodiac is one of the better procedural films ever. If you like All the President's Men, if you like Spotlight with Mark Ruffalo, and Spotlight won Best Picture Oscar, it was a weird year that year. If you like procedural kind of detective type movies, but into the nitty gritty of what detectives do, what this comic writer Jake Gyllenhaal's character, he makes comics for the San Francisco Chronicle, but he loves doing puzzles, and he starts putting together the puzzle that the Zodiac Killer left. It is all based on a true story. All the characters in it are based on actual people, and all of the major events that happen in it are based on actual events. The thing is, oh, and by the way, can I just say, you see some of the murders, and yeah. Listen, I'm gonna wax poetic a little bit about Zodiac. I don't want to get into it too much because even though you know the ending, kinda, you don't. And one of the most brilliant things about the movie is the way Fincher plays with your expectations. And oh god, if you haven't seen Zodiac, you have to. It's S tier. It is completely an S tier film. And of all of David Fincher's films, I think Zodiac improves the most on repeated viewings. Even more than Seven. Way more than Panic Room. It is a film that took him 5 years to make, by the way. He went from 2002 to 2007. Yeah. Well, then he put out Benjamin Button in 2008, so maybe Zodiac came out in the beginning and then he was working on the other. I don't know how long post-production took on Zodiac, but it feels so true to 70s San Francisco. The period is flawless. And again, it is an almost 3 hour long film that doesn't feel long at all. It is so well paced. Robert Downey Jr., this is before Iron Man, and he is all three of the leads are really good in it. I don't know what else to tell you. The casting in it is pretty much flawless. I love that film. I have it. I've owned it on like 3 different formats. It is a true S. It is a true S. Now, Benjamin Button. This is a weird one. And I will say, I watched it again recently, just a few months ago. And it didn't improve on a second viewing. This was only the second time I watched it. But it was coming up on like HBO, and I was like, you know what? I got 3 hours. I want to see if this movie's better the second time, because the first time I wasn't really all that impressed. There, full disclosure. It's C tier. I think it is. What is it with Brad Pitt and 3 hour long romantic films like Meet Joe Black? Did Meet Joe Black need to be 3 fucking hours long? Have you seen Meet Joe Black? It's a remake of a film from like the 40s. No, it could have been less than 2. And it still would have gotten the point across. But there's an effect late in the movie that's so awesome. It's almost worth waiting for 3 hours. There's good scenes in that movie. And there's great scenes in this. And look, David Fincher, the dude knows what the hell he's doing. I'm just watching that movie, and the second time even, I'm like, why do I care? You're trying to tell a story with such humanity And these characters are not moving me at all. The rest of the casting's fine, and I don't have a problem with the casting in this either. And the CGI, it's almost like someone showed him the makeup effects and the CGI, and he went, let's make a movie around that. But it was almost like the Jackass when the guys dress up like they're really old and they put all that makeup on to look really old. They could have filmed a movie about that. I'm being a little edgy there. Honestly, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button is an intriguing movie that I did not need to watch a second time. And I kept waiting for it to get better. And I'm like, I'm not here with this movie. Now, chat, how do you feel about Curious Case of Benjamin Button? Because it's if I'm looking at his movies on Rotten Tomatoes, I'm going to make a prediction and say it's one of his lowest. Not his lowest. We'll get going here on that in a minute. Rotten Tomatoes, David Fincher. And they've got his TV shows in here too, and stuff he's produced, which that doesn't work. They say he's directing World War Z 2. What? No way. Brad Pitt didn't talk him into that. Benjamin Button. Well, Alien 3 is his lowest. Yeah, Alien 3 is his lowest. Okay. I didn't see that one coming, but I guess it makes sense. I thought maybe one of these later films would have been... Spoiler alert. So let's talk about The Social Network. I am so split on this film. It is... When you talk about his best made films, he went from Zodiac, which is impeccable, to The Social Network, which is also pretty much impeccably made. It is... You can't take a single scene out of it. It is exactly the story that it needs to be. Jesse Eisenberg, brilliantly cast. You can see Mark Zuckerberg in him. You can see it. There's something about this movie that holds it back from me from being more than an A. And it's not to say that it isn't a fantastic movie. It is. But for me personally, if I'm thinking of Fincher movies that I want to watch, this isn't one I want to watch again. I've seen it probably 3 times. I'll be honest. I have watched it more than twice. 3 times, probably. I don't think it's more than 3. More than 2. I know I've seen it at least 3 times. I don't know. Maybe you can help me out. If you're watching this on YouTube, throw something in the comments and tell me, what do you think about Social Network? Because some people would argue that it is his best film. And I can't argue against it. Twitch chat as well. What is it about this movie that maybe I feel like isn't there? Is it that we're spending time with characters I really don't want to spend time with? Because there's pretty good background on all the lead characters. Timberlake is good in the movie. I think for me, you're seeing enough of the background of these characters to not like them. And then the way the film is made, most of the lead characters are shot further away. There's no close-ups. It's almost like you're at arm's length with every single character that's shot in this. There's very little like talking head type shots. When he's on the date with the girl that he ends up marrying, the camera is like on the other end of the table during the conversation. He doesn't put the camera up against people very closely, which he does in a lot of his other films. You get up and close with people in a lot of his other films. It's almost like he intentionally kept you further away from them. And I think that's the drawback for me. And I'm not saying that's the only reason. But when you have characters that aren't really that likable, doing crappy things to each other, and yet the film's pretty much flawless. I mean, I can't argue against it. And if you made a personal connection to the film, and if you just want to argue in the way that it's crafted, it's S tier. But for me personally, it's an A. It's a high A. Fight Club and this are both high A's. It doesn't get worse on repeated viewings, and most of his films don't, to be fair. Except The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Alright, now here's the problem with The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. It doesn't need to be remade. The original is a fantastic movie. The trilogy, the second and the third films are okay. In fact, I would argue they're above average. But the Bolt of Lightning, that was The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Fan-fucking-tastic film. There's no need to remake it. And then you watch this, and the casting... Something with the casting in the original was so spot on, and you believe both of those characters. And here, we've got Rooney Mara, and then we've got Daniel Craig is playing this writer, and I'm sorry. Look, this film may have some of its defenders, and of course, the soundtrack to this, as well as the soundtrack to Social Network, which won an Oscar for Trent Reznor. The soundtrack is the best thing about The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The story is not... The little tweaks they made don't make it better, and it's long, and it just is... By the end of the movie, I went, why? Why did you do that, David Fincher? You are a visionary director, and you've got to, at some point, you've got to start thinking the way about your legacy. Okay? When you've made some of I'm getting flustered. Just thinking about this movie is making me flustered because he could have taken that time and put it into something else. Don't tell me David Fincher doesn't get some of the greatest freaking scripts that have ever been written to come across his desk. And he chooses to remake an already damn good foreign film? Why? Was it a movie? Was it a money play? Did the studio just throw him a shit ton of money to make it? And he was like, you know what? Fine, I'll do it. I'll make it look better than the original. It looks better than the original, right? The original is almost shot like a TV movie. And I'd say that not as an insult, but budget-wise, you can tell they didn't have much of a budget, but they did a great job with the budget they had. Here, he clearly has more budget. I didn't give a shit. So, sorry. If you're a fan of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, tell me. If you like this better than the original, I can't imagine anyone saying that they like it better than the original unless you're someone who just doesn't like reading subtitles, in which case there's a dubbed version out there. It's bad, but go ahead and watch that. Watch the original. It's not an F. It's a well-made film. David Fincher doesn't make bad-looking movies. Gone Girl. So I saw this in a theater, and I walked out with mixed emotions. My first thought was, I wish I'd have read this book, because there's narration in it, but it's narration in the way that you are reading a diary, basically, or reading letters that were left behind. So I give the narration a pass in Gone Girl. You need to be in her head, especially in the second half of the film, when you basically realize what the hell is happening. If you haven't seen Gone Girl, you should check it out. I recommend it as a B, and it is right there with The Game. In fact, it's almost the same movie, except from a husband and wife marriage situation. It's almost the same movie. The twist in The Game comes very late. The twist in Gone Girl comes halfway through. And then seeing how the twist plays out is phenomenal. Like, it's so good. But knowing that twist, I watched it a second time. It was not as good for me. The other thing is, it's a Fincher film, but it doesn't really look the same as a lot of his other works. He's not trying to shoot it in low light. He's not doing these hallway tracking shots. It's a lot more fixed cameras. And I think he did that to make it feel a little more documentary, almost true crime-ish. And in the first half, you need that. In the second half, the camera's moving more, and for good reason. Oh, God. I'm so torn on this because I enjoy the movie. I like what he accomplished with it. I don't know how close to the book it is. I imagine it's probably a really good book. I mean, it was like a best-selling book. Just, he's an odd choice to direct that movie. But again, he's got the pick of pretty much every damn script that he ever wants to direct. I understand why he chose it. It's different enough from his other films, but not that different. It just doesn't really feel like a Fincher film, except in some shots towards the end, which I'm not going to spoil. If you haven't seen Gone Girl, again, I recommend it. Almost every movie on here I recommend you see, except Dragon Tattoo. Well, and Mank. Okay, listen. We're going to put this as a low C. It's about the screenwriter for Citizen Kane, who is kind of a larger-than-life character. It was interesting. It was. I watched it. It was on Netflix. It should still be on Netflix, in fact. I watched it. Gary Oldman, he's okay in it. It got nominated for a shit ton of awards. I don't know why. Like, why? It's not that great. It's perfectly watchable. Oscars? Mank? Look. It's well cast. The script is fine. But again, it's one of those where you're like, David Fincher, I guess he wanted to make a black and white film. Okay. Who here has seen Mank in the chat? Have you seen it? It's free on Netflix. If you have Netflix, it's free. Go watch it. Or don't. Like, it's one of those where I almost want to make it a D, but it doesn't deserve a D. But it sure as shit doesn't deserve a B. And I would watch the theatrical cut of Alien 3 again before I would watch Mank again. It's not to say it's a bad movie. It's okay. It's just... I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss with that one because it's... The pieces are there. It's all over the place. And I don't think it was edited all that well. It didn't hold my attention. And also... who is that movie made for? It's made for Hollywood, so of course it got nominated for Oscars, right? Look at this story of this, quirky guy who had these back and forths with my brain. Orson Welles. Hello. Anyway, if you like movie history, you like older movies, and you want to see a very dramatized drama. Save the drama for your mama. A very dramatized version of the story of Mankiewicz, who made the film. Then go ahead and watch it. But honestly, it's dull. It's a one and done, is what it is. So, all right. I have blabbed enough about these movies. Let me just say real quick. He has not made a better film than Seven, in my opinion, in terms of lightning in a bottle with the casting, the script, the look and feel of the film. He didn't really have a great budget, and he made a film that holds up to this day. And if people think of David Fincher, what's the first movie they think of? It's probably either Fight Club or Seven. Social Network, probably his most acclaimed. I would argue that they should be thinking of Seven and Zodiac, which, it's funny, the two serial killer movies are my highest rated. But those are his two that I think are the most flawlessly crafted. And I would just put Fight Club and Social Network just a tiny bit below him. But all four of those movies, look, I would watch Social Network again. I would. I just don't enjoy it the way I enjoyed the other three. And I enjoy Fight Club in spite of the lack of satire. I don't need him winking at the camera, but come on. Everything else on this list is watchable. Even The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. If you haven't seen the original, you'd probably be like, it was okay. The existence of the original pushes that to a D. Otherwise, it'd be a low C. It'd be right there with Mank, probably. But I cannot rule that out. So, that is my take on David Fincher's cinematic history. He's working on a new film right now. What is he making? The Killer. It is an upcoming American neo-noir action thriller directed by David Fincher and written by Andrew Kevin Walker, the writer of Seven. Based on the French graphic novel series of the same name, it stars Michael Fassbender and Tilda Swinton. Oh yeah? When's that coming? Distributed by Netflix. Photography began in early November 2021 in Paris, Dominican Republic in New Orleans, St. Charles, Illinois. Filming wrapped in March of this year, so they're in post right now. They haven't announced the date yet, but that makes me think it'll be next year. So I'm excited for that. I'm definitely excited for that. But what do you think? What is your favorite David Fincher film, and which one would you put at the bottom? My guess is most of you, looking at this at YouTube or here in the Twitch chat, would probably say Mank is probably his worst film. Or maybe it is Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Maybe you hated Alien 3 and you just cannot forgive. Even though it was his first film, and even though Fox gave him such a hard time on it. I don't know. Post it in the comments. Let me know what you think. But otherwise, it's another tier maker. David Fincher Films. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Hope you have a wonderful evening.